Namaste, namaskar, welcome, shalom alaikum, shalom. I am Mathura Das, and welcome to my 22nd live share being broadcast from the southwest of England during the lockdown. It's wonderful to be here. I'm very fortunate and happy being able to, during this window of opportunity that's appeared during this period, to be able to share with so many people, even though we're all kind of scattered around the world. It's amazing, really. And what I do in these presentations, these shares, if anybody's there, it'd be great if you can just say hi and the sound is fine. That would be brilliant, because we have had some issues with the sound, but hopefully it's okay. So how I normally start off by doing a couple of Oms, chanting Om, the sacred pranava Omkara, which is common for Hindus, for the Sanatan Dharma, in Buddhism, Jainism, and even for people who are just kind of secular spiritualists who are not really into any religious thing. And my mother used to love it. So Om with just chant some. Then I do some prayers to my teachers and my lineage. Then I'm going to do a chant and possibly a song, and then I will start my talk. And for those who are just tuning in and haven't seen any before, it's a long epic talk that has been going on for weeks and hours, and it's at a crucial point in the story now, where I've been in. Fantastic, thank you, Ram Priyaji. Another friend of mine who's been through a similar journey, but from totally different side of the world, from America. I've been telling my story from England, but we're all part of the same kind of generation that got caught up with psychedelics and the Indian spirituality and India itself. And so we're going to continue on with that story. And Vincent Desire from the Himalayas himself. Wonderful. Wow, all these people tuning in. I hope you're going to enjoy this episode of my story that's coming up. It's going to be, it's that question where people go to you, so Mathura, why did you leave the Krishna movement after all of that, you know? And so I've told a few stories, and it's building up to these next episodes that were going to happen, which were happening in 1979 and 1980. And that's what I'm going to tell in my story. And Sarva's there from Glastonbury, Haribol, and that's coming in a bit. So few Oms, some prayers and a song, and the story will be coming in a while. Sorry, just change the key, sorry, from mantras. That's it. It's better. Well, I'm chanting. You can do it at home if you want to. We can all kind of tune into the cosmic vibe. We're all connected to the Supreme Spirit who resides within the hearts of all living beings, within every atom and every molecule, and is transcendent from the creation, yet simultaneously one with it. So let us chant and praise Omkara. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swavadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sahagrajatam Sahaguna Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajevam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Shri Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachadine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paskacha Deshatarine. Welcome to people who've just tuned in. I'm Mathura Das, doing my 22nd live share since the lockdown, and just going to do some chant, and then I'm going to do a song probably, and then I'm going to continue on my epic story involving how East and West got closer together, how I became Mathura Das, how I joined the Krishna movement, and why I actually decided to leave the institution after giving up all my life to be part of it. That's kind of coming up in at least I'm going to see how much I can get done in the next share. It might take a couple of shares. I've just been looking at my notes. My goodness, it's amazing what we do in our lives. Lots of things going on, especially at that time in my life. So before we commence, I thought I was in the Radha Ramana Haribol mood. I thought I'll do Radha Ramana. And Radha Ramana, if anybody doesn't know, is the name of a beautiful deity of Krishna, one of the main deities in Vrindavan, that was manifested from a Shalagram Shila, a stone, to his devotee, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and has been worshipped for generations by different families in Vrindavan at the Radha Raman temple. And I'm really spoilt because on Facebook we get to see regular photographs of all the daily, because different families, they take turns in worshipping the deity, so you see different styles of Sringar in different seasons, and it is most probably the most authentic style of worship, the highest standard of puja, which is part of Archanam, is part of the Vaishnava process of worshipping the Lord. So Radha Ramana Haribol, and a few Radhi Radhis and Hare Krishnas most probably coming as well. Jai Ram Nishingadi. Excuse me. Temperature's going up, isn't it? It's here in England. It's the last day that my street. I tuned it, but it's gone out. It's going up to 114 degrees at the moment in Vrindavan. Somebody just said, I couldn't handle that. It's too much for me. It's a shame there's no cartels and mridangas, a backing chorus. Please join with me. Call and response. Jai Jai Radha Ramana Hari Bol. 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 Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Jai Jai Radha Ramana 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 Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Jai Jai Radha Ramana 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 Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Jai Jai Radha Ramana Hari Bol. Jai Jai Radha Ramana Hari Bol. Radhe 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 Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe 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 Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe 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 Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe 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 Jai 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 Shri Radhe. 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 Radhe 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 Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe 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 Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe Krishna 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 Radhe Radhe. Radhe Sham 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 Radhe Radhe. Radhe Krishna 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 Radhe Radhe. Radhe Sham 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 Radhe Radhe. Radhe Krishna 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 Radhe Radhe. Radhe Sham 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 Radhe Radhe. Radhe Krishna 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 Radhe Radhe. Radhe Sham 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 Radhe Radhe. Radhe Krishna 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 Radhe Radhe. Radhe Sham 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 Radhe Radhe. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Radhe 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 Radhe. Jai 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 Shri Radhe. Sham. The bluish black one and the golden one. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Welcome to anybody who's just tuned in. Just in the process of doing just finished a song, a chant, and I'm going to do most probably a song now. I was thinking of okay, got to turn that off. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to do a walk in the park, but I'm going to try it higher than normal because I thought last time in the normal tune it was a bit low, so let's see how it goes. Walk in the park is the idea of being stressed out, going for a break, walking somewhere in nature, wherever it is, and winding down and going into reflective mood, going to a meditative space and talking with God, having a prayer, a little conversation, and God talks back to you. Well, the answers are inspired from Bhagavad Gita, actually. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Okay, we got it now. Let's try it. Do 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 Walking in the park one day, must have been springtime. Never find time to pray, left alone to unwind. I feel my spirits rise, tingling in my spine. I find as I close my eyes, peace within my own mind. Oh Lord, and I thank you for this day. I know your love is the only way. You hold all the answers in your hand. Lord, won't you talk to me that I might understand? Ooh, ooh, Bhagavan Bole. Why deny my love? I've always been there for you, and always will be too. Guiding everyone along the journey home. You never walk alone. Deep in your heart you'll find me. Only the purest love can bind me. Deep in your heart you'll find me. Only the purest love can bind me. You need but surrender. Put your trust in me, and always remember your faith will set you free. Do 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 do. Oh Lord, and I thank you for this day. I know your love is the only way. You hold all the answers in your hand. Lord, won't you talk to me that I might understand? Deep in your heart you'll find me. Only the purest love can bind me. Deep in your heart you'll find me. Only the purest love can bind me. Deep in your heart you'll find me. Only the purest love can bind me. And that's inspired by the story of Mother Yashoda tying Krishna, and keep tying him and tying him and trying to tie him to punish him because he's broken the butter, and it's always too short, and in the end Krishna gets bound. He allows his mother to bind him. So there you go. It's all about love, intention, purity. Not that I'm anywhere near it, but that's the goal and the archetypal point of where we're heading with anybody, at least who's got the name Das after their name. It's all part of the whole Bhakti tradition. We somehow got the name Das, servants. So that's what we're attempt to do. And hi everybody, so lovely, so many lovely people kind of tuning in from all over the world. It's fantastic. It's so an honor and a privilege. Like I said, this it's set a precedent now, hasn't it? Everyone's kind of it's part of the new thing. Everyone's having live shares, zoom ins, everything. It's going on all the time. I think it's brilliant. I think it's great. Let's see how it continues post lockdown, whenever that's going to be. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on all those subjects because one of the reasons for doing all this is to not be have one's headspace involved, because we're bombarded with that nearly all the time, aren't we? So for those people who've only just tuned in, I'll just do a brief recap on the story so far, my story. Um, I've come overland on a big journey, and I've come to Bangladesh, and this is in the early part of 79, and during when we came overland, it was during the Iranian Revolution. We were bringing some trucks from Europe, two to India, one to Nepal, and one to Bangladesh. This is for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness that I was part of at this time, and I was really wanted to go to Bangladesh because my friend was there, and I'd heard from my friend Ravi, who'd been there, who enticed me to go on this adventure, that there were these amazing raga kirtans. And I got to hear raga kirtans and met the most incredible Vaishnavas, and I've shared that with you on my last shares. And also the kind of amazing experience I had in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, of diving into transcendental Vaishnava literature and the power that it has. I mean, books in general can transform you, and Vaishnava books can do what they do, which is connect one. It's part of the whole process I mentioned before, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam. It's about hearing Hari Katha and the power that that can have and attract one to Krishna. And that book that I had read really had the effect, which was Brihad Bhagavatamritam, was written in this mood of Sambandha, which is the point of bhakti, which is bringing us to unite with Krishna, and that's what he did. It introduces you to Krishna in such a beautiful way. So after that, having those wonderful experiences, suddenly I would have this great disappointment where the leader of this the sub leader, you could say, the leader of the whole area was Jaipataka, but he had nothing to do with these decisions. This was, as far as I know, this was Prabhu Vishnu, who was the regional secretary, and he was working with Nepal and Bangladesh, and I think maybe had some other places working with Jaipataka, who was not only a GBC but now had become a guru. And but they didn't want. Prabhu Vishnu wasn't interested in me going up to Kathmandu to recuperate from my jaundice. He just wasn't interested to even invest in it, and I became very disappointed, and decided to go back to England, and that's what I did, and that's where the last share ended. So I hadn't been with my family really for a long, long time. I'd left home in 1973, and this is 1979, and I'd visited once, popped in, cooked a meal, but never was going to stay. I didn't even know what exactly was going to happen. My mum had sent the money for the ticket. Somehow or other, I was going to pay her back, and we arrived. I arrived at Heathrow Airport. I hadn't really been in England for for many years. I'd left home, gone off to Amsterdam, been involved in Benelux, just popped into England. It was quite unusual when you've lived in a foreign country and you're English. It's interesting when you go and travel on trains and buses, and people are all speaking the foreign languages. You don't really notice what they're saying. They're all just it's just sound. And I remember when I kind of came back to England, I was just traveling on a bus and a train. I could suddenly hear everyone's conversations. I hadn't noticed all that before. And then it's all that familiar British landscape and London architecture. And so that's when my mum had picked me up with her pale blue Morris Minor from Heathrow Airport, I got to our home in Hampton. Heathrow Airport's not far from Hampton. We're really only about half an hour, 20 minutes from there. And I was just kind of like watching the streets and the shops, and everything was so different after Bangladesh and my village experiences there. And what was interesting was, as soon as I got on that plane, and it was air conditioned, and I didn't have an appetite, but they just had unlimited amounts of orange juice. I just kept drinking orange juice after orange juice. I just immediately felt much better. just come, the doctor had said that it's always good if you have jaundice, if you can, to leave the place where you got it, apparently. Um, so and so when I my mother was quite concerned because these are kind of weird things, jaundices and hepatitis, and quite infectious, so they were taking a bit of a risk, and she didn't really know that much about it. We didn't have the internet in those days to suddenly kind of like check out things. So as soon as we kind of got to the house, and that was a whole thing coming back to the house. I'd been used to living well in ashrams in that big building in the Healing, a big building, and I was quite used to that kind of communal living. And back, the house seemed much smaller than it was when I'd left, and they'd actually built an extension since I'd left at the back. My mum had extended. My father had died just after I left home, so my father wasn't there. And my brother, with his wife, Jackie, and two children, Lucy and Sadie, were living upstairs. So it was a joint family thing, and my grandfather was next door. We had this very unusual setup with a joint family system. So we talked, and I explained about things, but the first thing that she wanted to do was call the doctor, local doctor, just to check. And so he'd already been alerted and he knew I was coming. I think a phone call was made. He came quite quickly. I think his name was Dr. Woodruff, if I remember, from a local clinic. He was the GP. So he had his stethoscope and his blood pressure, and he looked at me. My yellow was pretty strong in my eyes, and and I told him, he could see that I had jaundice, but he didn't do like the Indian Ayurvedic thing of taking the pulse. And he just said, well, look, this is how it is. This is what jaundice is. We don't really have any medicines for it in the West. You have not, it just seems like you don't have a really, he was tapping at my back and things to see if I had a swollen liver, and it wasn't that swollen. I wasn't feeling pain, so he could tell it wasn't acute. But he said there's no medicine, absolutely no medicine that they have in the West for it. The best thing is just to eat the most simple things, and that's why it's recommended to eat lots of glucose when you have jaundice, because it's a very simple molecule and gives you energy. And then he left. And my mother, and he explained about the infection kind of rate of it. So luckily in our house, we had three different toilets. We had a toilet upstairs for Nick and Jackie. My mum had a toilet downstairs under the stairs, and we had an outdoors toilet. It was an old-fashioned Victorian building that still had an outdoors toilet that hardly anybody used, but it was worked out perfect for this situation. And no hugging, quarantining. It was quite similar. I was kind of trained for this. No hugging, kissing, shaking hands, or anything. It was all kind of hi, and the telephone, my mum had put a little disinfectant thing so that if ever I kind of picked up the phone, I had this little swab, cotton with some disinfectant. I had to kind of clean the phone. Very wise precautions. And then I remember that first just being back in a cool climate. This was around June. This was around June. I was back now. The heat had been so hot in Bangladesh, and the humidity. There was also while when I was been stuck in Dhaka, there had been a hailstone shower that was just wow. Never seen anything like that. It sounded, first of all, I thought it was like machine guns firing, and then it was all these. They were about an inch, some of them an inch and a half an inch, and it destroyed many of the palm leaves and stuff. So I'm coming from very extreme tropical weather into English summer, and it was divine. Actually, my body really, really appreciated it. It was feeling really comfortable. And there was a spare room in the front living room, and because we had two, my mother had her room and the backside, and then we had a front living room, and that was going to be the spare room because my mum had been renting out rooms to teachers who young student teachers who were working at the Hampton School. My mum was actually, funnily enough, quite close with the headmaster, who was a member of the Liberal Party, the person that had the big confrontation on why I left Hampton Grammar School way back in 1972. So she had a good relationship with the school. Some teachers were coming over, but at that moment the room was free, and so it was perfect for me, somewhere for me to stay. But that first day on a mattress, it was I had to change my whole sleeping arrangements. I could not. It was so soft. I wasn't used to sleeping on a mattress. And my mum made just some steamed vegetables. I remember some cauliflower and some other things, and with no, just some salt and pepper, and yeah, and I think some tomatoes that have been steamed and the skins taken off, and she'd also, the guy in the doctor in Bangladesh said that you can actually, funnily enough, he said rashgulas. He said certain kinds of cheese is actually okay on jaundice. Um, um, and my mum had bought some curd cheese from Sainsbury's and put a little bit of that in it, even though that didn't sound really good for jaundice. But I had it, my appetite, I had a gusto, it was beginning to come back. And the next morning, I decided I wanted to get an alternative look on my health, not just from allopathic mainstream medicine. And so I gave a ring to Bhaktivedanta Manor and talked to some nice friendly devotee from reception, answered it. And I said, "Excuse me," I told them who I was, and I was asked them if they knew of an Ayurvedic doctor in the London area, southwest London, near to where I was living. And they gave me the name and address of a Dr. Vashist in Ealing. So I told my mum, and so we went in the car. I phoned him up, and he was very respectful, very nice. He said, we made an appointment. We went a bit later that day, and my mum decided to just wait outside in the car. I didn't know what to expect. I was dressed. I didn't really have civvies. Yes, I had a few civvies from going overland, but I was actually just wearing my pajamas and a kurta and a shawl. I wasn't putting on tilak, and I didn't have a shaved head or a seeker, so I didn't look too threatening, but I did look exotic. Anyway, went in. Dr. Fashish was very respectful. He could obviously see that they Ayurvedic doctors don't even have to just feel your pulse. They can see how you walk, what you're doing, the lakshanas on your body, different things. They can make an assessment from all sorts of ways. It's a very subtle science. And he felt my pulse. And he just kind of nodded, and then he just said, "It's not too bad. We'll have this kind of you'll be healthy very shortly. Don't worry about that." And he says there's some very simple natural remedies, and all you need to do is go to Southall, which wasn't too far away, where the big Indian area was at that time, and it was not far from my place in Hampton. And he told me to get amalaki. I think it was trifala, all the things that are in trifala, and they're kind of Ayurvedic fruits and different berries, and you get them whole, very cheap. And he said also to get certain vegetables. Basically, he told me that the actual medicine, it was so simple, was every night boil a different vegetable, a green vegetable, let it sit in the water, and about a litre, and drink that first thing in the morning. And also soak these three things, these trifala, I'm presuming, and then you soak them in water, a glass of water, and drink those. And then when you'd had that, you would take the fruits, dry them in a grill, crush them with honey, and eat it. My mum was really intrigued, and what was unusual was that when I left him, he actually took some money out of his pocket to give to me to buy the things in Southall. I was just amazed. He was so devotional because he saw me like as a brahmachari, as a kind of a sadhu from the monastery, and he was just. I was so, and that when I came out and just told my mum what had happened, she just kind of her mind was being. This is the first bit of her mind blowing. Going to see a doctor and the doctor giving me a bit of money to get these natural things. So we drove. No pharmacist. We were just going to go to the cash and carry, the big shops in Southall, and get these ingredients. So we went there, and I got those things, and then we went over to this vegetable shop on the other side from the cash and carry, And there was an interesting incident where I'm there with my mother's kind of walking around. I mean, Southall is very exotic. It's not your English, average English suburb. It's kind of mini Punjab, mini Bombay, some people used to call it. There was Indian cinemas. It was just full of Indian people and Sikhs with turbans and women's in saris and shalwar kameez, and all shops selling various types of Indian things. And I go into this vegetable shop, and my mum's kind of like, she's walking around with me. She's just getting used to the idea of walking in public with her son. Obviously, kind of where, she's my mother and I'm her son. And well, it was obvious to others because what was going to happen was just as while we were looking there, this lady who was there, one Indian lady, quite elderly, she was looking at me and my mother and what we were doing and hearing, get this and get that. And she looked to my mum and she said, "You're very lucky to have a son like that." And my mother was like, "Yes, yes," I was like, yes, thank you. She was being very polite. And I suppose these were all kind of like, from the Indian lady's point of view, she most maybe had some kind of like wayward sons who were all kind of like getting pissed and doing this and that. And here I was, an English boy, dressed like a kind of an ashramite, which in an elderly Indian lady's mind is a good thing, basically, not just a worldly kind of hedonist. And anyway, so that was sweet and endearing. And then we went home, and then I was there at home, basically with my family, and it was very interesting to observe um, my brother and his wife and how they were after being all these years with kind of devotees and quite this strict routine and kind of this atmosphere that I've been surrounded in for years. And it was okay. It was quite fine. And I was going to go through a little bit of a journey in this space because it was a very, very different space, like I've been explaining. 1 minute I'm in Amsterdam, then I've got a confrontation, then I'm going overland, then I've come to amazing villages in Bangladesh, and then I've come back being all by myself in Dhaka, and then being very disappointed by a leadership decision and starting to really wonder where I'm going. And it's also this whole idea of home. I'd left home and gone somewhere, and then Amsterdam had become my home. My devotees had become my home. And then I kind of discovered India, and India as a whole had become my home. But I'd never really found a place in India. And then I'd gone to Bangladesh now, and I thought I'd met my tribe. I thought this was going to be my home, but destiny didn't want me to kind of settle there at that time. So now I was at home with my family, but I was really wondering, where is my home? Because where am I? Where do I fit in with this whole kind of Krishna consciousness movement story now? Now I've gone through this journey over, look, I'm only about, was this is 1970? I'm kind of 23. I'm around 23 now, 22, 23. I've been on this journey since 17. It seems like, I'm quite a young chap, really, at this time. If you look at a lot of people who are in their early 20s, they haven't done a kind of fraction of what I've done by this time. And, okay, and there I was going through this journey, and there was a couple of interesting things. That we were very fortunate where we lived in southwest London because there are these beautiful parks, and literally from my parents' house, um, if you chant 3 rounds, say, on your beads, 15, 20 minutes walking down through some few little nice suburban streets, you come to this gate and you go down to this wonderful little path that leads by Hampton swimming pool, and you come into Bushy Park. And Bushy Park is a massive path that I've described in earlier stories that goes all the way from Hampton Hill all the way to um, 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 Hampton Wick, and then from Teddington to Hampton Court, and there was cows there in those days, and maybe not in those days, but definitely deer. When I was a younger child, there was cows, and the National Physical Laboratory has its centre near there. And but the most beautiful thing is that within that park, there's a kind of a park within a park which is all ornamental called the Woodland Gardens, and it's one of my favourite places to go for a walk. I used to just take it for granted; it was just there. But after being around the world and finding parks and things, this is one of the great places to go. Right near Hampton Court, I highly recommend it, especially most probably now at this time of the year, which is coming spring. The rhododendrons are out, absolutely incredible. But it was closed quite early in the, it didn't open to the public till a bit later in the day. And but I was going to go, and the doctor said it was good to do a bit of exercise. It was good to have a walk, you know. You need circulation. So I started on that regime, and most probably on the second day there, I went off on a Japa walk, and it was I love japa walks. That's my favorite way of doing japa. I'm not really good at just sitting. I have to walk and sit, and so I was doing this japa walk in my kind of roby things that I had on. It wasn't cold, but early in the morning, it was most probably I was getting up and leaving, you know, before 7 o'clock, and I think I had a spare key, and I walked down there, climbed over the gate into the Woodland Gardens because it was still closed. So you know, I was kind of illegally in there, but you know, who was around? There was not really anybody, and I went for a little walk all the way around. Walked into the park, and one of the first things that you come to when you come from this side, from the swimming pool side, is that you come to the river Longford River, that was originally built by one of the King's Charleses, comes all from quite a way away, all through the neighbourhood, and comes through into the park, and I think it ends up at the fountain in Hampton Court. Longford River, and as it comes into this part of the Woodland Gardens, it's very idyllic and quaint. There's a little house, like a little mini watermill. There's a tiny little bridge that goes over, and there's a pond there. And it's all, the whole gardens are beautifully. They have lots of gardeners look over it and look after the gardens. And there's all these different sections to it. You walk around, and there's big open areas and lovely trees, and it's a perfect place for walking, relaxing, and meditation, especially when there's absolutely nobody there. And I'm pretty sure that it was on this first walk that as I was going, and you know, I was just still decompressing from the whole journey of Bangladesh and what I'd been through. And then I got into the Woodland Gardens, and especially they were so beautiful, you know, with all the morning birds chirping and the sun just glimmering through the trees. And then I went to sit under a tree by this beautiful little pond, and the gurgling of the water going down the waterfall, you know, and there was a few ducks on the pond there. And while I was sitting there doing my japa, my mind started to go back to what I'd just been in Bangladesh. And I started kind of going in my mind through chanting, through all those incredible experiences. And then quite shortly into that process, I came to Nikunj Bihari Goswami, who I'd mentioned in my share, this incredible Vaishnava, most probably one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. You know, in my estimation, a pure devotee. And oh God, I'm going to get emotional again. And while I was doing going and doing my japa, he came into my mind, and I just recalled all these experiences of being with him and being embraced by him, and just seeing his. And when I just went into a kind of a state quite very similar to the state that I had experienced in the factory before I even joined the temple. Quite a few shares back, one of the most momentous things that I'd experienced, which was the clincher for me about the whole Vaishnava Bhakti thing, was this experience that I had. It wasn't just learning from books and stuff. I actually had an experience with the mantra that was way beyond any kind of empirical process or any kind of effort that I was doing. It was pure grace, and I got flooded in a kind of a wave of bliss and ecstasy that was almost impossible to control. And this is kind of what happened just on thinking about Nikunj Bihari Goswami. Suddenly, I became flooded with in this blissful state, and then I started to feel the mercy of Mahaprabhu and Nityananda, and then feel kind of credible gratitude towards Prabhupada and the fact that I'd been linked to this, and I just went into this a state of grace, basically. And it was by my all these every time in my life when I've had an experience like this, I've always been alone, really. There's never been it's a very, very intimate thing between me and God, and I have no real control of it. It just spontaneously happens, and I've gone into this space, and my heart is heaving, and I'm just full of gratitude, basically, and fully feeling absolute bliss. And that experience most probably kind of lasted in that intensity for maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, it's hard to say, just chanting and going deeply into that space and feeling blessed and knowing that wherever I am, in whatever situation, this whole idea that, that Krishna is under the control of some institution or an organization or a committee. This is all the lessons I was getting from Krishna, is that I am with you. It's the song that I just sung, guiding everyone. Krishna's within the heart, guiding everyone. And I was on my path, and Krishna was letting me know that he was there and everything was okay. I was being looked after. And that was a fantastic experience. A few days later, I think I did it, I did it a couple more times, going every morning for my Japa walk. And of course, I didn't have this experience every day. This was just incredible, this experience. But then, maybe on my third walk in the park, just as I was coming back from my walk and heading back to the gate, I suddenly looked up, and there were these policemen. And it was a little bit like, hello, hello, hello. They were very friendly, and they were like, hello, what are you doing here? And I just was very, very honest. I just told them who I was. I said, I'm sorry, I did climb over the fence. I know it wasn't open. Excuse me, apologies for that. But I've come here to meditate, and I've been in India, and I'm a monk. And they want to know what was on. I took my beads out of my bag, and I showed them my rosary. And I just said, is there any problem? Is there any reason that why you've come? Am I causing any problem here? They said, well, just in the future. Well, the reason that we came is, he said, we heard from the gatekeeper that for a couple they'd noticed somebody walking around in pajamas in the park, and. Nearby in Teddington, quite nearby, is a big psychiatric unit called Normansfield. And they just thought that maybe I was an inmate of Normansfield, had somehow escaped and was just walking around the park. And when I reassured them that I wasn't, and I was just a kind of slightly eccentric monk going on his morning meditation, everything was fine. And they just said, look, please, if you, wait till, the opening time is at this time in the future. If you want to come, just wait for the opening time. And I said, thank you. And so that was a bit humorous. And while I was at home, I also started to, I didn't know what to do after kind of like being there for a few days. I started to do a drawing of Krishna that get me amused. I was a copy artist, and I had another bit of paper that I started doing a drawing, and that kept me occupied. But the more kind of conversations I had with my brother and his wife, my mum, and some of the friends that were visiting the house was, when you kind of like when I said this was it was very interesting for me to kind of step outside the Krishna bubble, and see everything from that in that perspective, and try and understand kind of, there's this, I think in all groups and cults that are kind of missionaries, they have this kind of very kind of this idea that they see themselves as the center of the universe, in a sense that, and everything is around, is the most important things going on in the world is what's going on in their world, and they have a very high regard for themselves and they're in the scheme of things. And that definitely was there amongst Krishna devotees. The Krishna devotees really thought that we are a power to reckon with in the world, and I was really, what I was noticing was quite a lot of top-heavy hierarchical management, and groups of people. I was going to discover this more on this next visit, but it was coming up that after Prabhupada had gone, different people were rising in the management story, in the hierarchy, and were kind of like getting entrenched in certain positions, and they all had their little cliques of devotees around them. And Yeah, most of these things, most of the devotees I've been hanging out with was fine, especially, like people like Rasika, we got on really, really, really well. And we used to talk about everything. And we all kind of, agreed on our observations of how we saw things. And I was trying to put the jigsaw puzzle together and figure out where it was all going, this Krishna movement business. And so seeing it from being at my pet mother's house was a whole new experience. And and also, I would, when the conversations came round and to things, I would always try to bring the conversations onto kind of big things, pertinent things, spiritual things. Not I was kind of preaching rah rah rah, and I just said I noticed the capacity for so many people, their stamina for these types of discussions was quite less, you know, and it was this kind of I kind of dropped out to join the Krishna movement because I couldn't quite get my head around, understand the purpose behind the whole materialistic society and people just doing things. It was all based on economics, mostly the drive, and I just kind of well, in a sense, the Krishna movement was all around that, but my personal story within it was not fixated on that at all. Mine was still in this spiritual path, and I was on a process of wanting to learn more about aesthetics and art and spirituality. But I noticed that, everyone was locked in to this process of earning money, surviving, the whole process of survival and living in the world, which I didn't find really, it wasn't really I could never get my head around so that human beings had all they could come up with. You'd see things on television with all the members of the parliament, and all they're talking about is economics, 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 as if that is the only purpose for human existence. Always bewildered me. I wonder how far the human project, with its focus on just economic development, was actually going to go. Without all its emphasis and all the other things which I felt were meaningful in life. A lot of this is just my way, maybe a lot to do with my immaturity and understanding the ways of the world. Even up to this day, I have to say, I most be suffer from that syndrome. So I was going through that journey, and then my mother, after a little bit, was kind of started to kind of like notice that I was recovering. That was a big thing. After taking all this medicine, just for a couple of days, these natural things, literally within 2 days, there was not a trace of yellow in my eye. My appetite was back. And to all sense and purposes, I was almost cured. I had my appetite back. I wasn't eating heavy, rich things or anything. And so after a while, my mum, it was nice. They'd had me there and I was there and, I was her son. But I was on my Krishna thing. And it was most probably not the best place to stay too long. And I got the subtle hint. And so I made some inquiries and I called up Bhagavan in France and told him what had happened. And because we'd last seen ourselves in Mayapur and I'd gone off to Bangladesh. And he was saying, okay, forget Bangladesh, Prabhu Vishnu, come and see me after a while. Come over to Belgium and Holland, earn some money over there, and then come to my big birthday party that's going to be in France in New Mayapur in a few weeks. And I said, okay, let's see what happens. We were all kind of buddies again now, Bhagavan. But I still didn't know what this birthday bash was going to be. And so I went, my mum lent me some more money because I didn't have any money. And I went from Heathrow to Amsterdam. And when I got to Amsterdam, of course, it was all wow. It was very, very different from what it was when I'd gone, and lots of people were pleased to see me. But I wasn't going to stay in Amsterdam. Mrigapati, who I was very close with, had got married quite shortly before this to Sanatan Dharma, a Dutch devotee, and he was down in Antwerp, and she was pregnant with a child who was going to become Chandravali, and they were living in Antwerp, and he had opened a centre there in the Catalina West. And so Belgium was a much better place because basically what I was doing was I was trying to collect money to pay off my mum who paid the ticket, the loan she'd just give me, and then get enough money so I could go off back to India. But I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do yet. It wasn't really clear. And so in Antwerp, you've got the central station, and then you've got this big street that goes high street that goes down, and there's all these squares around with these incredible churches and all these kind of statues. It's an amazing place, Antwerp, and many of the towns like Ghent and Bruges, they're very beautiful to walk around. There's some great historical buildings and and statues and things like that. And so when you went right down to the end of this big high street, you turned down to the smaller road at the end, which was called Catalina West, and they'd got a property there, which was an old shop. And it had this kind of as you came into the shop, they had the windows that was in the shop before, and then you went and there was a downstairs and and then the toilets and stuff downstairs, and then there was a spiral staircase going up, and there was another room that was the temple room, and then there was other rooms above, and there was a kitchen up there. And so I came there, and Mrigapati was very friendly. He was very happy to see me. We got on really well. He'd taken on a management kind of role rather than just leading the Sankirtan at this time, and so it was fine with me. All I had to do was pay a very minimal amount for records, which and books, some books, and then I would go out and I was allowed to keep this money for my journey. And while I was there and discussing with, because Mrigapati was explaining to me what he kind of his ideas of how he wanted to develop it, because they hadn't really, he had all these ideas. And while he was talking and discussing it, I said, look, Mrigapati, why are you going to get all this boring furniture and kind of stuff you can just get here? Why don't you just kind of wait a little bit, and I can get you a whole bunch of really amazing stuff from India and send it to you, make it look really fantastic, you know. And so what? And he said, okay, we'll come up with some ideas and show me that. Show me what your ideas are. So while I was chanting japa in the place, I would just kind of, this is how my creative processes work. Once I tap into something and go into a meditative space, I suddenly start to see things, and I go through a whole process, and I started to imagine because he told me that we need the altar here, we need, and I started to, and it took me a few days to come up with this idea of all the various things that I knew were available in India, because I've been traveling around and seeing things. But I'd never gone on a specific kind of like purchasing journey to purchase things. And this was going to include original paintings from Nathadwar, maybe not all the top artists, but some of them, because there's the top artists are Narottam Narayan, and then there was B.G. Sharma in Udaipur, but then there was also Burulal and Dwarkalal and different artists, and I just got really excited. I just got so excited, and then it was also the kind of wallpaper to use on the walls. I wanted to use that beautiful straw and natural fabrics, a different colour downstairs. I had it all worked out, basically. I knew there was going to be some kind of furniture, some sofas with some tables and side tables downstairs, some nice wallpaper, and at the top I had this whole idea of these beautiful embroidered mirrored hangings and stretch ones that we used with the little flags at the bottom and long strips to go around and have lighting behind them and lights on the side, and at the end some cloth hanging down, and then some maybe and then also I'd seen the tiles that they'd used at Soho Street, the new temple in London. They'd moved from Berry Place, and they were very, they weren't marble, but they were fake marble, but they looked really good. And so Mrigapati had decided that was a good thing. He was going to get some of those for the floor there. And well, that was going to happen a little bit later, because Mrigapati, did I go with him there at that time, or did we go later? Anyway, somehow or other he did get those tiles, and they went in there. So I had the ideas, and it was going to, and I was very excited about it, and it also gave me kind of quite an inspiration and lifted my mood. And every day I went around in Antwerp, did all these areas. I was so used to it. I'd done all this over years and years and years, and I earned a reasonable amount of money. I did get, after I could have gone on and got more, but I invested in a few things for my journey. I got at that time a Philips tape recorder recorder with stereo microphones and some Sennheiser headphones, and I bought some kind of little car stereo speakers so I could have the speakers connected to this thing. It was quite a funny little system. You didn't have all these kind of combined things at that time, and I specifically wanted it for my recording stuff in India. Two microphones, it'd be great. Could have one on a tabla, one on a voice, and it was it was not too expensive. I couldn't afford a Uher or a Nakamichi like that. And then it came time for I got my money and everything, and then it got time to go to and we worked out the whole plan of how we were going to do it. Mrigapati, most of the money that I was earning, I was going to use that. That's my money and traveling, but I was also going to get some compensation, a little bit from Mrigapati, but mostly the money that he was sending was going to just be for all of the things that I was buying for him. So my job was to find the things, locate the things, communicate with him, let him know how much it was all costing, and get the money from him. It would be sent to me. I can't even remember how the money was sent, or it was sent directly to the places where the things were going to be that I was going to purchase. And so then, I went with Matanga. We drove to Bhagavan's to France to this big birthday bash, and Vimukta Sangha was there. Most devotees were there. So I don't know if Mrigapati had come or if he stayed in Antwerp. Most probably he stayed back because of his wife and kid, and keeping the other devotees there. And there were some really, there's a lot of people there who come from England as well. Narahari had come from England, Ravi had come, and Sulochan. I'm not going to talk too much about Sulochan, but he's going to figure much later down in the story. One of the worst things that ever happened in the whole Krishna movement story is involved with Sulochan, and he wasn't the cause, he was a victim. Some other people wouldn't agree, but anyway. So Sulochan was there, and first time I'd really met him. Oh no, I'd met him in Mayapur. That was a thing also at that Mayapur festival in '78 that I didn't explain. I've glossed over so many details. I had all those posters. I met lots of people involved with posters and art and all the I realised I wasn't the only devotee that had an obsession with Indian iconography. There was lots of devotees and all the Indian artists. I got to meet Jadurani and Parikshit and all those artists, and it was at that Mayapur festival. So then that's how I did meet Sulochan before. That's how we knew each other. He really enjoyed posters, and he had some kind of business in India. He was selling pendants and things like that. So we were at this festival, and I got to go into the room and talk with Bhagavan. He had, it was there were so many devotees there from all over, and it was this was 1979. And this is just after 1 year of being a guru. So all those devotees who were in his temples and his own, the majority of them were not Prabhupada disciples anymore. The majority, in terms of the volume, were all these other devotees who'd been waiting. And he'd been, as I'd shown the way that he had been presenting himself as guru around his own, was having some kind of initial effect, because all these devotees were just kind of like enamored by him, and I was just watching all of this happen. And but anyway, we had this connection, me and Bhagavan. He kind of liked me and liked my taste, and he liked my kind of unusual way of seeing things, and even if he didn't agree with them. And we met there and we had this talk, and what he did was because I still thought maybe I'd go back to Bangladesh because I fell in love, and he just kind of put me off. He says, "Why you want to go back? They don't care about you there, He wanted. He said, and I told him, look, I'm going to do all this thing from Mrigapati, and he said, I want you to be my man in India for things. If I need some stuff, purchase and stuff like that, and some art and some pictures." And I told him, I'm going to, I'll let you know about some different, if there's any art that you want from Mayapur. And I got really excited. He, basically, well, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to meet different Indian artists now, commission works that could be used either for publishing in the different books, because we need extra paintings, or for decorating all of these centers and temples that we had. Bring some beautiful Indian original art into the movement, and he was up for it. It was great. I thought, great idea. I knew what I was doing now, and I was Bhagavan's man in India. Okay, even though he didn't have a temple in India, so but we were going to see how that was going to work out. So, and then this thing happened, this feast. You know, um, I mean, it was so opulent that they had this big refrigerated truck, massive, just full of milk products, just to keep it all fresh because they couldn't know the kitchen was too small. And they had a big, huge marquee, and there was all these kind of like celebrations. And Jayatira had come over from England as well for this birthday. He was still Grihasta at this time. He was the only Grihasta, a married man, still wearing white. And, you know, now Bhagavan was with the saffron, and he was his honoured guest at that time. They weren't really friends that close, but somehow or other, at this time, they were, you know, being amicable. And I was just literally observing it, and our little gang, you know, with Matanga or Ravi, whoever, we were watching all of this stuff, and then kind of, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? And we're all just kind of like, yeah. I mean, it was incredible. Some of the devotees, I remember that one devotee from Italy, while he was giving his praise, I mean, they were getting emotional. They were really, um, I know that they are because I've spoken to some very old senior devotees who were disciples of Bhagavan just recently, and they gave their hearts to Bhagavan. Bhagavan had a big influence in a lot of people's lives at that time, and especially a lot of those devotees in Europe, in Spain, and Italy. They Gurudev, he was the major person influence in their life at that time. And I was just observing it. I was just wondering where it was all go. There was definitely some kind of charisma and a buzz he had, but I definitely wasn't seeing him in the same way that his disciples were. And then they had this feast, and there was a massive feast, and we're all sitting down waiting for this feast to be served. And Vimukta Sangha was next to me, and Vimukta Sangha was a regional secretary. He was quite high ranking in the zone. So that's how it was. You had the GBC was the head, and then he had these kind of sub-zones. So Vimukta Sangha was the regional secretary of Benelux, you know, Holland and Belgium. And there was all these, the other main players, you could say, in that time that I can remember was the sannyasis was Indrajumna, Ayodhyapati. And I'm not sure if he takes sannyas at that time. And Samaka. They were the big kind of leaders and around Bhagavan at that time. And while we were sitting down and taking prasadam, the devotees were doing this big kirtan, and some of the people were joining it, and it was getting, and then there was a fountain there, and suddenly devotees were throwing people into the fountain, and they all got intoxicated by this kind of spirit, kind of having a party spirit. There was a kind of, they, you know, they hadn't been in this having fun. It was a big festival, but it got a bit out of hand, you know. And I'd just come from Bangladesh, and I'd been watching all of this beautiful etiquette and the way they did things here. And then there was this kind of Western interpretation of this festival. It was all kind of getting a bit out of hand. And then, as they started to come to the prasadam, and started to grab devotees and drag them off, to throw them into this thing. And Vimukta Sangha was getting really nervous next to me because he knew that they were going to come for him because he was well known. And that's what they did. And when we saw, a few of us, when I saw this, I think I was with Matanga and Ravi, we just kind of like, let's get out of here before we're done. So we went away from the feast. The feast got totally disrupted, this incredible feast. They'd made this cake, gigantic cake. A whole bunch of women had spent ages in that house making this cake. And as they started bringing out the prasadam, yeah, before we left, that's what happened. It wasn't just people going into the fountain. People started throwing prasadam at each other. You know, this cake, people just getting it and throwing it. And then it started to get really mad. And we went into the car and locked the door, and we were watching it all. And it just literally went bananas. There was literally hundreds of devotees. Because the leaders were doing it, they all thought that it was okay. All the brahmacharis, they had, hey, Samaka Maharaj, so, introducing everybody, let's throw this prasadam everywhere. Meanwhile, as well, into this story, Narottam, who was an old friend of Bhagavan from before Krishna days, and my friend from Bombay, he had arrived for this event, and he'd come to the local station, and they'd taken Bhagavan had sent his car and a driver to pick him up, and during this thing, Bhagavan was up in his room. He wasn't in there. He didn't really know what was going on. They were having some kind of there with Jayatirtha and maybe a couple of others up there. They were having very kind of sedate prasadam. And then there was this thing where Narottam, we were watching, we were just watching, and then we noticed some devotees were hiding behind a bush, and we noticed one other devotee come with a bucket of dal and sneak up behind them and just go and throw the bucket of dal all over the devotee's head. And we were just looking, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And I don't know if I witnessed this. I think what actually happened was, this happened, but I heard about it afterwards. We actually decided, hey, they could come for us any minute. And we just got on that car and drove out and went to the nearest village, and thought we'll just kind of escape for an hour or so just to let it all calm down. What happened while we were out in that village is that Narottam had arrived, and he had a very beautiful pashmina shawl on, and he suddenly came out of the van, and all these devotees were throwing prasadam, and at that moment Bhagavan and Jayatirtha came out of the room and there was a kind of veranda upstairs in the chateau, and he looked down and he could see what was happening, and he tried to call out to the devotees, don't throw on Narottam, and just when they did that, Narottam was there somewhere, boom, and threw some prasadam all over him. And there was Narottam with his pashmina shawl with prasadam all dripping down and wondering what the hell was going on. And that was the story of the prasadam there. It was quite shocking, really, for me. All of us, us devotees who've been in India, it was like, wow. It's just like, I don't know. I'd kind of like left this whole energy, this kind of the Western temples and the atmosphere. It had really changed from my day when Prabhupada was the central figure. Now there was all this young kind of unbridled enthusiasm coming from these younger devotees, and it was all kind of like a personality cult worship, and kind of quite fanatical kind of way of dealing with the culture and everything. And I was just kind of, I had no, it was very unattractive for me, the scenario. And what happened was Matanga went back to Amsterdam, and Ravi had Narahari and Ravi. I don't know if Ravi had the car or Narahari had the car, but we all decided with Salochan to go back to England. And I had all my money and my stuff like that at that time. So I went back to England after this, and while we were waiting for the ferry, it was amazing. I remember we got into this conversation. Sulochan was there, and he was the only American. And he suddenly went on a talk about how America was kind of God's country and Russia was the evil empire. And it was so kind of black and white and so kind of fundamentalist. We were looking at each other, me and Narahari, going, well, I'd never heard a devotee kind of go, America. It was almost, so that was another interesting, unusual side of Salochan, that he was quite a nationalist, an American and vehement anti-communist Russia type person. And, they are the demons, we are the good guys. I'd never encountered a devotee to say that. And this was actually causing me a bit of, as I've been going along in my journey as a devotee and seeing the general atmosphere, I mean, there was, when it came down to it, amongst the whole environment of all the devotees that I was meeting, I was only meeting a few devotees that I really resonated with and appreciated or respected. Many of the devotees I was kind of, after seeing them and their attitudes and everything, I mean, most of the devotees in Holland were very nice and innocent. I have to say that there was nobody on really big trips. It's just that they were all a bit naive and a bit goo goo gaga, and didn't really have kind of the sense of their own discrimination. And but in India as well, when you saw kind of, you met many of the American devotees as well. They were all quite that. And when they were in India, they just didn't really click with the Indian culture. They were all they really their training had just been on traveling Sankirtan or onto some kind of quite fanatical sannyasi, and that's all that their kind of training had been based upon. And many of them hadn't even gone deeply into the literature either. And I was on a different trip altogether. My whole trip at that time was how to meet interesting people and get more into the roots of the Indian culture. And I enjoyed hanging out with Indian people a lot. And of course some devotees that I got on with, but I was very cautious at this time when who I was hanging out with. Anyway, I got my came back to England, got my ticket, and arrived in Bombay, and it was most probably again it was most probably late September, maybe early October at this time, maybe late September, yeah. Was it? Was it? Or was it? Oh, yeah, I think it was. It was gone through the summer at this time, yeah. Spent a little bit of time there, and I the first thing I did when I arrived in Bombay was, I mean, the temple, everybody knew me in Bombay, but now I was in this whole kind of like, I was in this new chapter, really new chapter. Um, because before I'd been with the library party, and then I'd not gone to Bombay, I'd gone to Bangladesh, and now I was back again, and I went out and bought myself a whole bunch of new cloth and didn't dye it saffron. This was quite a big statement in ISKCON. You were kind of in those days, there was no kind of hardly any in and out. You were either in the ashram or to be live outside. You had to be a kind of a married person, or you didn't really have any justification for it. I wasn't really sure how people made that big jump from being a kind of a brahmachari to a grihasta when they had no training. Lots of people joined in their teens, and how were they going to get money and survive and do all these different things? Still wasn't quite sure how that was going on, because generally at that time in most places there was less married people and more brahmacharis. But I was making this statement, and also from that library party, and at this time I'd started to grow a little bit of hair. I wasn't regularly shaving my head. It was much shorter even than what I've got it now. It was quite smart. And I was a dapper dresser, and I had nice dhotis, and I got nice kurtas made by some tailors in Bombay, stocked up. And so I was making a statement, and I wasn't really going to spend too long in Bombay for even the authorities. I told them what I was doing. I'd just come back from this. I'd spoken to Bhagavan. I was doing some shopping for a centre in Antwerp, and I was working for Bhagavan. In fact, I was Bhagavan's man in India. That was my kind of protective thing around me. And no one really said anything. And I got to stay in a little room. They had all these different rooms now in the temple room. Around, if you went into the temple room, temple building, you had the courtyard and these little rooms around the top. And it was still getting on its legs, the Bombay temple. And my friend Narottam was there. He was the head pujari. We hung out. I built up my Indian music collection as well. Apart from getting all my, I actually had a lovely case with all my cassettes numbered and written down. I had a really, really good collection of Indian classical music at that time, and Narottam had a good collection, and he put on. He was getting deeply involved in Indian music, and he was going to start learning Veena. At that time, he wanted to learn Veena, so he was my close friend there, really, in Bombay at that time. Okay, so I had all this plan to do all this shopping from Mrigapati, all these different things, So that involved me going certain places. So I worked out my route of where I was going to go from Bombay. So this furniture that I wanted to get was called Shankaida Furniture. Shankaida is a kind of a place outside Ahmedabad, and it's famous for this furniture, which is done on a lathe. It's round and it's lacquered with decorative designs on it, kind of browns and maroons and orangey golds and lacquered, and because you can go in Delhi and different to the government state emporiums and to some of the boutique, and you can get to see the different crafts from different states in India. And that always, and I've been to some kind of life members' houses and or some restaurants and seen this furniture, and I thought that is so nicely Indian and it's quite practical and strong. That would look beautiful. So I did. I went up to Ahmedabad. I went to the Central Gujarat Emporium. I met a lovely Bengali gentleman whose father actually happened to be a police officer for in Vrindavan, and he was a lovely man. And he liked me, and I made this big order for. And told him the dimensions. We selected. We went to the workshop. We checked all the different colours. I found a material at one of the shops that was going to kind of cover the cushions that were going to go on top of this furniture, and he said that we'll get to work and we'll be in communication, and then that would be all eventually shipped over to Mrigapati in Antwerp. Then I went up to Udaipur because if you look at Bombay, you go up the coast, Ahmedabad, Udaipur, and of course I went to see BG Sharma, and we met, and I had the good news that I had this project in, and I wanted to order 3 paintings from him, and one was Radha and Krishna, classic with gopis sitting on a throne, and 8 Ashtashakis, and the gopis Radha and Krishna. I wanted a picture of that about this big, 3.5 feet by 5 feet, and one of Mahaprabhu, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and one of Krishna and the cows. And I had maybe a few more I really wanted. I wanted Krishna lifting Govardhan Hill, but he said that he could do maybe 3, and he was going to do them for a very good price. In those days, they were just going to be 5,000 rupees each. And so, and then while I was in Udaipur, they have all these incredible cloth shops and hanging shops, and one of the shops I went to just had mounds and mounds and mounds of these the hangings that I wanted, the long strips, the torans. They're called torans. Torans generally just go over the door, but these are long ones for kind of pandals and festivals, and these are all original, not the modern ones. They're all kind of beautiful old ones. I selected through hundreds. I had all my measurements. I was quite professional. I knew exactly. I could see the whole thing in my mind. Where I wanted these to go around the downstairs, around the corner, and maybe one's up in the temple room with the lights behind. It was this whole idea of having lights hidden and shining on artwork on the walls. So, and then I went to Nathadwar. I had a quick visit in Nathadwar. Met some of the other artists, and put my orders in really for these for different pictures, and some of them I paid a deposit for. And one of the artists, I had this. I had to say this part of my ideas was most probably a bit over the top, and eventually it was used in the Kaisersgracht. I wanted the whole ceiling. I was trying to figure out how to make the ceiling look decorative, and I couldn't afford to bring an artist there. So I was thinking of getting a painting that could be just stuck on the ceiling, a big, big, big roll of canvas. And there was one artist in Nathadwar who was not specifically brilliant, as good as the others at figures, but on decorative work. And I can't remember his name, but I ordered this thing for him. So I was quite busy, had beautiful, wonderful darshan of Srinathji. I maybe even at this time went to Nathadwar and stayed at B.G. Sharma's house. He had a house there. So I got quite close with him. Um, and that was wonderful. And I was just enjoying myself immensely, really. This, while I was by myself doing my service, I felt completely fine and attached to Krishna, and not missing the kind of the temple environment really at all. I just needed to wake up, do my japa, and focus on my this service, and I was really enjoying that and meeting people and finding that people like me, and this way I looked with white cloth with not a full-on shaved head. I found this was the best way to this kind of circle. It wasn't, I was making kind of a mild statement. I was a Westerner Hare Krishna, but I wasn't a monk. you know. I didn't really know what I was at this time, I had no idea. I was contemplating the idea of possibly becoming a grihasta. I wasn't really sure what that was about. I didn't know how long I'd be able to go on in this role. And and then I went to Delhi. I went to Jaipur, And part of the things that I wanted to get was brass items. I wanted to get some brass lampstands and things like that. And I found those in Jaipur. I got some of those, made some deal, paid some money. They were going to send those off by post also to Mrigapati in Belgium, and some lanterns to hang, some decorative lanterns like the Moroccan lanterns. And then I got to, and then I made some friends. I was on this Indrail pass. This was this wonderful thing that I had. I had a 3 month, or was it 6 month, a first class Indrail pass. Now, they're great, these things, because you don't need to go through, and these are days before there was computers. Everything was booked on trains. Even if if you went to the central place in Delhi, it was an office with all these bits of papers. It was all done by hand. And the Indrail pass, it allowed you to, any station you went to, you could just kind of go there and say, look, I want to go tomorrow on this train, and boom, you'd have it confirmed. Only people like government, judges, police and stuff, they had got this and this kind of special priority. And if you had this Indrail pass, and first class meant that you didn't go on these AC carriages. You didn't even need it, because this was kind of the cooler time of the year. These carriages with a compartment with just 4 berths, 2 down, 2 above, and a passageway on the side. And you can open the windows, and it's great because maximum you're sharing these quite spacious rooms with just 3 other people, and got to meet lovely people traveling this way. It was a wonderful. So when I got to Jaipur, and I was got to talking to the guys at the station, showing them my car. They were intrigued with me, and they told me that uh, why they knew that I was, I got to let them know that I was involved in Indian music and stuff like that, and they were very intrigued. And I would go back to Jaipur, and something they would do something very nice with me, and I'll explain that in a bit. I went up to I went to Delhi, and I went to all the government emporiums, and I was still thinking about this kind of cloths and hangings. I had ideas for what to have behind the altar window and in front of the actual altar window. And then I was going to have some kind of like paintings from Puri of Hanuman and Garuda at the sides. And then I needed some cloth for downstairs. And when I went into the Kashmiri Emporium in Delhi, they showed me this kind of material that was a thick cotton with these woolen floral motifs, and it was called cruel, spelt with a Crewel, not cruel as in cruel. It's called cruel. And but they didn't really actually have exactly what I wanted and everything. And I talked with them, and it was very complicated about how to kind of like order something to. And they said, why don't you just go to Kashmir? It's beautiful. Our country, our state is beautiful. And I have to admit, I always wanted to visit Kashmir, so I did. I went all the way. So I'm having this amazing time. I've got my Indrail pass. I'm going all the way. You can't get a train into Kashmir. The train only went to Jammu, and then I got a bus from there, and I came to Kashmir, it's Del Lake, and I stayed on a boat. I always remember it was called Lucifer. And I've met Kashmiri people, and they go, Lucifer, that's a very old boat. I don't know if it's there anymore. It was well known. I stayed there, and and I met all these different people. I went round and found out where they made the cruel. I sat down with them. I gave them dimensions. I tried to explain to them exactly the motifs and the colours, because it was unlimited how many colours. Now the problem was Kashmir's quite a long way away. After giving this order, there was no way that I had. In an ideal world, you have all your craftspeople and stuff in the local areas near you, so you can go check after you've made an order and you've designed something with them and they're doing it. This is one of the lessons I learned, that you not to have complete faith that they're going to actually totally understand what you've done and or execute the agreed design. You know. Anyway, the interesting thing is that years later, Mrigapati would have these in his living room after they went through a whole journey. These specific things that actually came from there, and I succumbed. I must admit to I'd seen, I'd had to do to had a pashmina. It was one of those things, if you were into cloth and things like that. And I have to admit, I wasn't really a staunch brahmachari. I like nice kind of mudka silk things, and I wanted a nice shawl. And once you'd seen a pashmina, you didn't really want to have anything else. And the only thing that I could afford, because it was so expensive, was like 2.5 meters of just plain light grey pashmina cloth that I turned it into a shawl. They had it in row, and I didn't have hardly any money, and this was very extravagant, and I had my pashmina shawl that wouldn't last forever. It would disappear mysteriously and get stolen from me years later. But I had it for a while, and so that's what I did in Kashmir. Went back to Delhi, and then I think I went back to Jaipur. And when I went back to Jaipur, um, I was just about to. I spent just a day or there, kind of making sure all the things that I had ordered were all right. The guys at the in the train station, when I was going to book my ticket, I was just going to stay there for one day and go the next day, and they said, "Why are you going? Didn't you know Nikhil Banerjee is playing here and Lakshmi Shankar for 2 days program, and you're going to go?" You know, and I said, "Well, no, I think I'm going to have to change that. Then I'm going to have to stay there." Yes, 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 yes. So I changed my booking, and they were like, "Great," and we had this very good rapport. And so I did. I stayed, and I watched this incredible concert from Nikhil Banerjee, one of my favourite sitar players who I discovered. Of course, everybody knows Ravi Shankar, but what he's one of the gurubais of Ravi Shankar is Nikhil Banerjee. He was younger than Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar Khan, and the first recording I had of him doing Molkons, I'd actually played it in Bombay, and Achutananda had been in the next room, and when he heard it, he came rushing in and goes, "Who's that? That doesn't sound like Ravi. That's somebody else." And I said, "It's Nikhil Banerjee." And he said, "Please let me borrow that." And I let him borrow that tape. And because Nikhil Banerjee has, some people consider him was the actual best sitar player ever. Yet the three greats were Ravi Shankar, Nikhil Banerjee, and Vilayat Khan of their era in music. And I got to see this concert, and then I also found out that Lakshmi Shankar was staying where she was staying. And I just want this is the great thing about India, at least for me, was if you just wanted to meet somewhere, you could just find out where they were and just go and meet them. And I just wanted to talk to Lakshmi Shankar, and I met her, and she was with Nirmala Devi, who they were giving a concert. And I found out they were both students of a teacher in Bombay, in Calcutta, called Chinmoy Lahiri. And even though Lakshmi Shankar had been taking lessons and singing on some of the albums that Ravi Shankar had been doing, such as the one with George Harrison, Shankar Family and Friends, and Ravi Shankar's two music festival albums from India, which were fantastic compilations of many, many musicians. She was the main singer, as well as her daughter, Vijay Lakshmi. Lakshmi Shankar had married Ravi Shankar's younger brother, and Vijay Lakshmi ended up marrying L. Subramaniam, the violinist, who's the brother of L. Shankar, the violinist who played with Shakti and with Peter Gabriel. And as I got to know who these musicians were, and she was a very gracious lady, very cultured and very educated, and she told me that she had done some concerts in Dallas, and that Kula Shaker had organised it for Jan Mastaby, and she was very impressed with Kula Shaker. And she'd had one, Chaitanya Dasi in Los Angeles, had actually taken quite a few lessons from her in Los Angeles. And I actually, and I asked her some questions about music, and I told her what I wanted to do, and all these different things, and she was very encouraging. And okay, there's a few things I'd kind of missed out in my story, but I might have to go back to them and in this story, because I'd gone on a musical. This journey in India was a mixture of doing all this shopping, going around from Mrigapati, and at the same time going on this journey of mine, the aesthetic journey of not just purchasing paintings and things, but I was still trying to figure out this thing with the music and the Gaudiya Kirtan, and the fact that I'd started these preliminary lessons in Amsterdam with tabla, with Jamaluddin Bharatya. And when I got there, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because when I was in Bombay, I remember before going on this journey, I wanted to kind of see if I could kind of somehow carry on with my tabla practice. And there was one gentleman that used to visit the temple in Bombay who's retired from the movie industry, but in his day was quite well known as a music producer, and his name was Dataram. And he had a stiff neck. He would move like this, you know. But he was very friendly. He used to come every morning for Mongolati. And I started to talk to him and tell him about, oh, I've been learning tabla, and he could see my enthusiasm. And he took me under his wing, really, and I told him I wanted to carry on learning tabla, but maybe mridanga. And he says, I think I've got the right person for you. And he says, I'll introduce you to the scene in Bombay so you understand it. And he took me to Meha Boop Studios, which is the big recording studios where they did all the big Bollywood stuff. And there were these two very famous producers there the day I went there, called Lakshmikant and Pyari. And the most famous, the two famous singers in India, the lady singers, playback singers for the Bollywood movies, were two sisters, Lata Mangeshkar and Asham. And this day was Lata Mangeshkar was there. I didn't actually get to meet her. She was in a booth with this with the microphone. And when we came into this room, there's all the musicians there. It was incredible. They were on a plinth in the middle, Lakshmikant Pyari, and then there was the violins around, and surrounded around with the different musicians and different booths with different microphones for the mandolin players, for this. It was incredible. And I kind of arrived there with Dataram, where there was a lull in between, and I got introduced, went round, and that's where I got to also meet Hari Prasad Chaurasia and Shiv Kumar Sharma, who were well known, but still, at that time they were quite young. They were most probably middle aged at that time, and they hadn't reached the status in the music circle that they have now. Now they're in their 80s, and they're considered very senior musicians. There they were kind of in the mid level of that. But I got to meet Shiv Kumar Sharma at his house after that, and from this connection with Dataram, I got to meet Sudharshan Adhikary, who was this lovely Bengali gentleman who lived not far from Juhu in Kandivali. And he had met Prabhupada, and he was a family of mridanga players. And Prabhupada mentions in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that there's a kind of a caste of mridanga players, sometimes known as Adhikari. And that Sudarshan was from that. And then I would later meet, in quite a few years later, Gaurangadas Adhikari. And he was a lovely gentleman. And he was, again, a bit like the Ayurvedic doctor, Dr. Vashist. I would go to him, and, you know, he didn't want any money at all. In fact, after I'd come from his house, he would see me to the station. He would buy me a samosa, a sugarcane juice, and he would, you know, he was very encouraging. And I bought a new set of tablas, and I did a little bit of practice, but I couldn't carry my tablas around everywhere. I did a little bit of practice. I didn't really know how I was going to carry on my tabla practice. I used to have the books with me. I used to, you know, when you do practices and you're a musician, your hands are quite nervous. You find yourself tapping on tables and stuff, going tilikita taka 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 tilikita taka, and all these different practices. And so that was going on. I thought I'd just fill in, backtrack a little bit. So that was going on in my life. So back to Jaipur. And there I am, and I've met Lakshmi Shankar, and then I was going to carry on my journey to Delhi on the train the next day. And when I got to the platform, there was quite a lot of people there waiting for somebody. I wasn't quite sure, and I noticed Vishwa Mohan Bhatt, wasn't even that well known at that time. I'd met him in Ahmedabad as well. He was playing this Mohan Veena. It was a converted guitar. He was there. There was a whole bunch of people. Anyway, I got into the train, went down the corridor, went to the last compartment, and there was another gentleman sitting in there. And I kind of had an idea of what might be happening, but wasn't really quite sure. And then I heard this kerfuffle with all these people coming down to the carriage, and lo and behold, Nikhil Banerjee came in, and Swapan Chaudhary, who's on tour with him playing tablas, and they came into the carriage, and there were the chaps from the station who booked my ticket, and they looked at me and they kind of winked, and they kind of worked this whole. They deliberately organised the booking so that I would be in the same carriage with my hero, Nikhil Banerjee, and with Swapan Chaudhary, and it was a wonderful journey. In fact. Doesn't take that long to get to Delhi, and the other gentleman who was with us, he got out after maybe one stop, and it was just us three. Nikhil Banerjee was a very reserved gentleman, classic Bengali with the aquiline nose, and he had the glasses, and he wasn't an extrovert at all. He was quite introverted and laid back. Understated is the way to describe him. And I was kind of, and Swapan Chaudhry was sitting next to me, and we got really chitty chatty, and I had my um, started talking to him about music, and I had this great collection of music, and I'd made this recordings in Amsterdam. I got some records from the library there, from the Connoisseur Society, a couple of rare recordings that you couldn't get in India, and with Aliat Bakan on Sarod and Mahapurush Mishra, who I didn't know much about. And when I told Swapan Chaudhry I had these recordings, he was so excited. He said, "Please, can I listen? I've been dying to hear this. I want to hear, Mahapurush Mishra's tabla with Aliat Bakan." So he sat there and he put on my Sennheiser headphones plugged into my little tape recorder, and he was just sitting there like this. And then Nikhil Banerjee was looking at me, and then we started having this really wonderful talk. I mean, again, he was as fascinated in me as I was in him, and he was kind of intrigued because he could see I wasn't just some kind of uneducated, fanatical Westerner. I had a little bit of understanding of culture, a love of Indian music, and so he was kind of intrigued. And then he told me a little bit about his life, how he'd gone on a spiritual search, and in his 20s and stuff, and he'd actually come to Brindavan because for Bengalis, Brindavan is the kind of center of, and being a musician, so much of the music and the songs is all devoted to Krishna and Vaishnavism. But unfortunately, he hadn't really met anybody that had put on a great impression with him during this time. And he'd be kind of started to develop kind of agnostic tendencies. He was quite open about that. He wasn't really sure. He had lots of questions. And he asked me this question. And he said, "Why is it that if there is a God, there's so much suffering in the world?" And it's one of those hard questions, and no one had really asked me this question before. And to this day, I can't even really remember exactly what I said. And I went into a whole kind of description about talk about the nature of karma and free will and all sorts of things. And at the end of it, he said, "That is very nice. You know what?" He said, "That is the best explanation I've ever heard from anybody." And I was really quite stunned because I can't even remember what it was that I'd said. And we became very close. And anyway, we all had to get off in Delhi, I think. Yes, I think that, yeah, we all got off in Delhi somehow, or otherwise they were going somehow or other. That's where we parted ways. And when he left, he gave me his address. He said, "Please come and visit me in Calcutta when you're there," because I said, "I'm going." I said, "Wonderful, I'd love to meet you there." It was great. And I said goodbye, and we said goodbye, and that was a great, I relished that meeting, and I would get to meet him afterwards. So my journey continued. And also, and part of this journey was to go. I went to somebody's house in Bombay, and I'd noticed this really beautiful applique work that had been done with South Indian motifs on, with lotus flowers and conch shells and stuff in the satin. And I really wanted some of that for the temple. And the lady told me it's from Madurai. And I just, I'd never really been down in the south before, and I'd heard some Carnatic music. I had a bit of South Indian food. The South Indian food hadn't really grabbed me at this time, idlis and dosas. And the Carnatic music that I had listened to wasn't really doing it for me as much as North Indian music. It was a very different style, and so I was intrigued to go down to Madurai. So part of my journey was I went all the way down to Madurai. It was a really long journey. It's right down the south of India, and I spent a couple of days there. And I found somebody who kind of made these kind of designs, and I kind of it was at the government emporium, and I made an order for those. And can you imagine? I was quite a bit of a fanatic. I really wanted these specific things, and because I had this Indrail pass, it was already prepaid. I could just jump on a train and go there. It was just a matter of time. and I was getting to see all these places and meet different people. And when I kind of then I kind of went up to Calcutta, and during my journey, I think in Delhi, I'd heard. I popped into the temple there, even though I didn't stay there, as far as I remember. I can't remember if I did stay in the temple or not. Most probably did. I think Tejas was in charge in those days. I think Trivikram was kind of hanging around. Um, when I was in Delhi, I've lost the flow of my thought there. Um, yeah, when I went up, while I was in Delhi, that was it. I heard a tape of a foreigner singing kind of different bhajans and kind of classically style, and I said, "Who's that?" And that's Santosh. I said, "Oh, Santosh." And then I heard something, I tried to find some more about him. They said, "He's in Calcutta now." He said, "He's intellectual. He's studying Indian music for some years." I went, "Right. It'd be interesting to meet him. He might have some answers for me." So, when I got to Calcutta in my journey on this trip, um, I kind of like I wasn't staying at the temple. I actually I met this really interesting family that I'm still connected with, the Chobes from Calcutta, and I was in Sutter Street, and I just got out of my hotel, and there was this little boy there going, and I was just got out of my things, and I didn't really know where to go, and this young boy said, "Where are you going? You have to come to my hotel." And I was going, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, 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 you must come here." And he was so kind of intelligent and interesting. I said, "Okay, okay. I will tell my grandfather. My grandfather is up here. This is our family hotel." And so I went up the stairs to the tourist inn, and I met his grandfather, and then later on I met his father, and my other friend Sanjay Chobe is part of this whole family. He's the kind of that's his uncle, and he lives in another place. So, and there's other devotees like Atmavidya and people that have a connection with the Chobe family. Chobes are originally from Mathura, and they're a version of or a caste which is Chaturvedis, people who are Brahmin caste who are known for knowing the four Vedas, but when they resided in Mathura, they became known as Chobes. So I got to stay there in this place, and the grandfather was what a character this gentleman was. Um, and I was getting deeply and deeper involved with classical music, I'd gone not from just listening to instrumental music. I started listening to vocal music and getting very attracted to it. And what had happened was yes, that was it. I went to the temple from Sutter Street in the morning for the morning program. And I noticed this devotee Santosh. I didn't introduce myself yet, and he during the japa, people were doing their japa, and I noticed that he was quite eccentric. He was walking along, and he was off in some kind of like musical world while he was doing his japa and different things. And there was a class and all of these different things, and I sat down. Next to him, almost deliberately, in Prasadam, in Albert Road, sitting down in the morning, sitting on the floor, and I just introduced myself, and then we got into this discussion about, I told him I was really interested in music, and when he heard that I was interested in music, his whole mood changed. And I could tell from his response that I was most probably one of the first devotees to even talk to him about his love of Indian music, because that wasn't really where most devotees were at. But I was, and he started to really open up to me, and we became really enthusiastic. And after we'd taken Prasadam, he showed me this place up on the roof where he used to sit. He used to have a blanket that used to protect him from the shade, and he would sit up there and do all his scales. And he told me what he'd been through. This is like 1979, nearly going into 1980 shortly, and he had been there for quite a few years, learning from various different teachers. But his main teacher was Shoilam Banerjee, Banerjee, the Tansen School of Music. And he'd met everybody, Ali Akbar Khan and these different people he'd been doing. And the way he'd survived there is that they weren't interested at all in any of this that he was doing there. They couldn't see even the value of what he was doing. But he would make a life member every now and then and bring a check. And that's all really the managers and everybody wanted to know. And then they tolerated him. And he was connected with the Bhaktivedanta Institute because he was also knew Sanskrit. He was a scholar. He had the strong academic tendencies. His father had been a jazz musician in America. He came from a musical background, and he was very different than the other devotees, and very different from most of the Americans devotees. Most of the other American devotees were a bit kind of rough around the edges, and he was cultured and sophisticated, and we got on really, really well. And something happened also at this time, and he also, this was a great thing. I told him about what I was trying to find out these, I had all these questions, and he said, look, there's one book you should just read. Start with this book. And he gave me the name, and I immediately went off and bought it. It was called Historical Development of Indian Music by Swami Pragyanananda. And I went off and bought that book and immediately started reading it. And wow, some of the answers were, as I went through the book, I kind of looked at I went immediately actually to one chapter. I jumped a few just to get to it. And it was on Vaishnava Padavali Kirtan. And this is exactly what I wanted. There's a book called Historical Development of Indian Music, and a whole chapter dedicated to the Padavali Kirtan of Bengali Vaishnavism. Nobody had ever explained to me that we had a tradition. This kirtan was part of a musical tradition. It's a part of a certain line and a certain style. And then I read about the history, which is quite common to most devotees now. But, a lot of the evidence there was from a book called the Bhakti Ratnakara, which was written by Narahari Chakravarti, who Prabhupada quoted quite a lot in Chaitanya Charitamrita. This book was written after Mahaprabhu. It was a book dedicated to describing the post-Chaitanya Vaishnavism scenario. And one of the main things that happened in Gaudiya Vaishnavism after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and while I'd been in Khetri, in Rajshahi district, on my visit in Bangladesh, I didn't actually go to Khetri. And Khetri was the place where Narottam Das was from. And he was from quite a kind of a wealthy family. And then he became a sadhu. And after going to Vrindavan with Shamananda and Srinivas Acharya, and they returned back to the west, there's a bunch of adventures of what happened with all these manuscripts that they brought with them that the Goswamis had written, and it was through them bringing these to the eastern part of India that Gaudiya Vaishnavism started to flourish, because they were all handwritten and copied around, and this is how it became spread all over Bengal. But what's the main thing that's mentioned about the music is that, because when you're looking at Indian music and styles, everything has to be connected from somewhere, nothing comes from nowhere. So the predominant type of music that was being played in North India at that time, and at the court of Akbar, we know, and with Tansen and Swami Haridas, who was in Vrindavan, was Drupad, a form of Drupad music, which is a specific style of classical music. And that much, but then the book by Pragyananda explains all the types of music that had possibly led up to that. And then it describes this incredible festival. After Mahaprabhu, the first kind of Gaur Purnima, the first celebration of his birth, was held in Kithari. And Vaishnavas came from all over eastern India for this festival, and it describes in the Bhakti Ratnakara who, when Narottam presented this kind of kirtan based on these influences that they'd learned in Vrindavan, and it became kind of it was transformed into the Bengali idiom, and then shared with the Vaishnavas, really for the first time. And there was Advaitacharya's son. I remember Achyutananda's playing mridanga, and some other great characters that you've heard about. They were all in this. And Janavi Devi, Nityananda's wife, she was in charge of the prasadam and cooking. It's an incredible festival, and during and it described in the book that the unique thing about the Gaudiya Vaishnava Kirtan, Padavali Kirtan, was it would start with Gaura Chandrika and go into Krishna Leela. In other words, it would sing some Leela and pastime about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates, And then one of the Vaishnavas in that story would sing a song about Radha and Krishna. And through the bhav that Mahaprabhu would experience upon hearing that kirtan, the kirtan then would go into Krishna Lila. And this was a very specific thing. So I was learning all of this. And I was just, my questions were, does this still go on? What's this got to do with the kind of kirtan that I'd seen so far? These were all the gaps that I was going to fill in. But at least in this book, here I had a clue about where all this culture was you know, in our, you know, I had this confirmation that Gaudiya Vaishnavism culture was a culture with its roots in all the ancient traditions of Indian aesthetics, and there was a link between this and the and spirituality. And this is the first clues that I got from reading this book and associating with Santosh. Now, this story is, as you can see, there's lots and lots of things I'm going through, and lots of details I'm learning. I'm getting saturated. Another thing that happened at this time, I'm going to just carry on for a while, even though that you know, I've been speaking for a while today. Is something this there was this program being organised for the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust in. Not Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, Bhaktivedanta Institute. It was one of the early science conferences of science and spirituality that was being organised, and at the centre of it was Swarup Damodar, who I've mentioned before, was from Manipur, and he was the person that we wanted to be in charge of the library party, and he was travelling around the world, going to these conferences being organised by the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and or being as a representative going to other ones where they're interfaith and science. And I'd never really met him before, maybe had a couple of conversations, but he had a very good reputation as being very humble and very sincere devotee. Now, he just came one day and arrived in Calcutta for this conference. And I'd just come from Sutter Street where I was staying for the morning program. Maybe I missed the early bit, but I got there for his class. I didn't know what to expect. And he gave a talk, and then he did what other devotees did. He didn't spend too much time. He looked very, very agitated. I wasn't expecting this. And he suddenly went and explained why he was feeling upset. And I was all ears. I was dying to hear this. And there was, you know, quite a few devotees there for this class. And he said that he'd just come from Japan, from somewhere, on his way to, and they wouldn't allow him into Japan. He had arrived in his saffron clothes, and they had refused him entry because Krishna devotees had been blacklisted. And he was just so upset that you know, he's coming from a Vaishnava tradition and great pride in the tradition from Manipur. He's born into and met Prabhupada, and it was a big thing for him. You know, he was like the only person from a traditional Vaishnava family to join these Western Vaishnavas, and then suddenly he's being refused entrance into Japan. Now, I'm not going to go too much about this because, you know, the person who was involved is a fantastic, incredible person, Guru Kripa, but he was also a maverick. And it's not that nobody knows about this, but what had been going on is much of the fundraising, when Prabhupada had made a point about that he needed lots of money to build all these projects in India. Guru Kripa had just gone and said, okay, I'll do it. He loved Prabhupada, and he just went off and he developed this team around him, a very, very kind of well, there was all sorts of devotees in the party, but some of them were kind of just like almost like brigands, and they developed this whole kind of system in very dishonest thievery, really, in Japan, and they all. I'm not going to get into it, but it was like stealing people's gold watches, doing things, doing very not very nice activities, to the point of I know personally from somebody else through somebody else that actually somebody got killed because they had been followed by somebody who wanted revenge from some of their criminal activities, and and really some dark stuff. Anyway, whatever had happened in Japan, it was so bad that the Japanese government had put a blacklist at that moment in time, and it was really doing in Swarup Damodar's head the fact that he'd been humiliated And the Gaudiya Vaishnavism and this insult he considered to Prabhupada, because when Prabhupada had gone to Japan and to do the printing for Krishna book at Dai Nippon and the big company, he'd just been so impressed by the respectful nature and humility of the Japanese people. Sorry to mention that for all the people who are fans of Guru Kripa. I mean, he is an amazing character, but this is basically this is what I was witnessing. This is what was happening in ISKCON at this time. After Prabhupada had gone, and Prabhupada was there to stabilize all of these things going on, different devotees were going through the story, and there were these cracks appearing in the unified sense of the Krishna movement. There was all sorts of different opinions and different people doing all sorts of different things with their little groups. And in Calcutta specifically as well, most of the devotees there were kind of like connected with Bhavananda, and who's somebody I'm going to talk about coming up. And in those encounters, I just noticed my term for it is really redneck. They were Santosh actually. There was a milkman that used to deliver milk, and he was a mridanga player. And so on weekends, Santosh had told me, he said that he'd been learning not just classical music, he'd been learning traditional kirtans, and he would sing with these kirtans on the Sunday feasts. And some cultured Bengalis would come on the Sunday feasts to hear Santosh singing with this milkman. But, this is the last thing that interested most of the American devotees and devotees connected with Bhavananda and these cliques. Their main focus was just this kind of gang type of mentality and how to get as many life members, and focusing not at all really on the indigenous cultured Bengalis, but the moneyed caste of the Marwaris. Not that I've got anything wrong with Marwaris, but Marwaris were the business class from Rajasthan, and they were going to be one of the main funders of the Krishna movement around India, because they are the business class and they are vegetarians and they're mostly kind of devoted to Krishna. Their roots are in Rajasthan, but they are traders. They're kind of pure bhanyas, vaishyas, and some noticed to be some could be quite ruthless. So the emphasis in Calcutta and many temples was cultivate the Marwars, get the life membership. We're not into this culture business and these Padavali kirtans. That was the least of their interests, and I noticed that there. And I think there's going to be absolutely just too much to talk about today in this one session. I'm going to have to get around it. So I'm actually going to have to carry on tomorrow or the next day, most probably tomorrow, with this complex story that I'm trying to tell of all these different influences that are happening to me. You can see, I'm definitely not following any. I'm Bhagavan's man in India. They're trying. They're watching. Who is this Mathura Das? He's in white. Who does he work for? Who's he under? And I would just say I'm working for Bhagavan. I'm doing this shopping. I'm on this, and I would kind of stay at a hotel and pop in and pop out, and this was part of what my story was going on in terms of the mainstream ISKCON story. And at the same time, I was observing all of these characteristics and things that were happening in the story with the players of the Krishna movement, and just watching it unfold and wondering where my story was going to go amongst all of this. Because after talking with Santosh, because I kind of presumed that my base in India working for Bhagavan was going to be in Bombay, he says, if you're into music and you're into the kirtan and into the culture, forget Bombay. It's all tinged with Bollywood and commercialism. If you want the authentic place, Calcutta is the place. And I just was thinking, okay, maybe I should move my base over here, but where, how is that? So these are the kind of questions that were starting to come to me at that time. And also, I'd met Bhava Bhuti, who was from Assam. Very nice, another really nice devotee, American devotee. Him and Shravanananda had married two sisters from Assam. I don't sure if they were twins, but he was in charge of Guwahati, and he was organizing a program up there, and he said that I want to organize this program, and I want you to come, and Santosh and Hiranyagarbha, who was in Mayapur, wanted you to come up soon. And he had a certain date for that program, and there was this mysterious and Santosh had told me about this chap called Major Chanda who was in Mayapur, who was he was an ex-major in the army, and he had been a student of Amir Khan, who was in this time considered one of the top vocalists in India. And so I was interested. This is going to be something quite interesting, and so that's going to be something I'm going to talk about in my next talk, because it's just too much to describe about what's going on in this one session. So thank you all. I've been speeding through all of these different things, purchasing things, going on my journey, going things. But this is what was happening in my last year, my last kind of period with full time in the ISKCON movement. It was going to run its own course, and you'll get to see where it all goes. In my world, I'm having a really brilliant time. Really brilliant time. And I'm just doing my own thing. I don't have anybody telling me what to do. And everything I'm doing is Krishna related and it's creative and I'm free and independent and I'm getting educated. So this is kind of what I thought my purpose in my life was for. And I just wasn't becoming less and less attracted to these leaders in ISKCON and their gangs and their agendas. It didn't seem to really kind of like suit where I was at. So there you go. Thank you so much again for sharing, allowing me to spend some time to share these stories with you. We are getting there through the story. There's still more to tell with the specific Hare Krishna movement story of this period. We're still in 1979, haven't gone into 1980, and there's quite a lot more to come still. So stay in there, and wherever you are at the moment in the world, whatever you're going through, I really hope that you're not suffering too much distress and anxiety from the circumstances, and that you're managing to kind of like um, find, like I am, a kind of like some silver linings and windows of opportunities to do other creative things or become more reflective. Or in England at this time, many people are starting their gardens and getting into their gardens and planting seeds and dealing with slugs and all that kind of stuff. I'm not doing that. I'm in my flat here. But um, okay, well, lots of love. Big hugs to you all. Take care and see you all soon for the next share. Hurry on.